Have you ever thought about just how much stuff we have to think about on a day-to-day basis? And how, over the course of human progress, we seem to just keep adding more and more stuff to think about? I read something the other day that the wisest, most well-educated person from 500 years ago, over the course of their entire life, may have consumed up to 74 gigabytes of information in total. That's through reading, dialogue, observation, etc. On the other hand, the average person today consumes up to 74 gigabytes of information every single day. Back in those days, the average person had like 3 things that they had to think about, and they could devote the entirety of their mind space to just checking those few boxes. And yeah, I mean, compared to now, we were really dumb back then. I'm not trying to wax nostalgic for a time when we were like, hey, you know what? I wonder if we could treat the bubonic plague with chicken buttholes. The point is, with less information also came fewer variables for us to sort out. Maybe we were dumb, but our brains were at least working the way they're supposed to with the information that we did have. Fast forward to now, we seem to be on the other side of the spectrum. Too much information and brains that are being completely overwhelmed. And I mean, is it me, or does it just feel like we've been getting dumber since the internet? Like, if the timeline of human wisdom is on a bell curve, we were doing pretty good for a while, but then the internet happened, and now we're at that point of no return on the roller coaster where it's slowly rounding out the hill, just before we start hurtling towards a state of idiocracy. On paper, the promise of the internet sounds wonderful. Oh great, a collective catalog of all human knowledge and a conduit to everyone on the planet, just right there, just here you go, here's fucking everything. How could this not be good? To us humans, information is one of our greatest commodities. But the problem is that time is an equally important commodity. I mean, we're all going to be dead soon. We don't want to be screwing around at a library. Neo jammed a stick into his head and learned Kung Fu in like 5 seconds. Give me that. But when we try to speedrun wisdom, the convenience comes at a cost. If we remove the barrier of entry to information almost completely, we humans do the same thing that we always do when there's too much of a good thing. We should bear in mind that we're still working with old caveman brains here. The architecture of the human mind hasn't really changed in over 35,000 years. On the other hand, the volume and the complexity of information that we ingest has and continues to grow by the year. At what point does this become a compatibility problem? It almost feels like we're trying to run the latest software, but on Paleolithic hardware. Credit to our hardware though, for a while it held up pretty well. For thousands of years, we've been operating on the same basic learning program. One that comes with a built-in feedback loop that motivates us to seek out information, or raw data that has been organized, knowledge, which is information that is committed to memory and understood, and wisdom, the ability to use knowledge to make good judgments. While much is still unknown about what exactly motivates us to seek information, there's strong belief that the pleasure hormone dopamine plays a large role in driving our information-seeking behavior by offering a feel-good reward in anticipation of the information's potential use later in life. As we ingest information, we get a little hit of dopamine that signals to us, hey, this could be useful, seek out more information. When our brains determine that information is useful, it's internalized and committed to memory for later use, thus becoming knowledge. Once we've acquired knowledge, we're then ready to start making judgments. Assuming our information and knowledge is sound, we should be making good judgments. However, that's often not the case. Mistakes will be made. And as painful as that can be, it's not always a bad thing. That suffering can be a very useful learning signal, letting us know that we need to go back and recheck our information. So we gather more information, build more robust knowledge, and we try again. When we finally make a judgment that does work out, we feel a great sense of pleasure or relief. This triumph validates our information-seeking behavior and delivers on the promise of the original dopamine reward. As we acquire more information that leads to success, the better we are at recognizing what information is useful and what is simply novelty. Better information leads to better knowledge, and better knowledge leads to better wisdom. In the ideal version of this feedback loop, there's got to be a Goldilocks zone of information volume where not too little and not too much is just right for building better wisdom. If we crank up the volume of information being fed into our brains, we start to get more and more dopamine boosts in anticipation of wisdom that we don't actually have the time or the energy to build. In this case, who needs wisdom when information itself and the anticipation of achievement becomes increasingly, quote-unquote, rewarding? Our caveman brains are basically telling us that stockpiling knowledge is an adequate substitute for building wisdom. But if we're not confirming that knowledge by working it out and putting it through the ringer ourselves, it's like cheating on a test and thinking we're smart for getting an A+. Now, this might be fine if we lived in a world of consensus. No one can be expected to investigate every bit of information that they absorb. We need to be selective about what areas we choose to build our wisdom, and for everything else, accept the consensus as truth. Before the internet, you'd get a newspaper with one headline on the front page, and all your neighbors got the same newspaper with the same headline. And there was at least a general consensus that the information you're getting was properly vetted and could be trusted. But in an unlimited information democracy, you're opening the floodgates to an endless diversity of opinion and perspective, making it virtually impossible to have a consensus on what is true and what is not true. With the internet, we've created a perfectly fertile ecosystem for cognitive bias to flourish. Why should I make an effort to find the truth when I can have my truth? Why bend to the world's logic when I can bend the world to my logic? Whatever it is that you want to believe, no matter how batshit crazy, it's near certain that somewhere out there will be others who share in those same beliefs. To have a wise society, you need good ideas to be met with overwhelming confirmation and bad ideas to be met with overwhelming condemnation. In a world where good ideas and bad ideas are met with both confirmation and condemnation in near equal parts, it's the worst type of friction. You're getting just enough confirmation to hang on to your beliefs, but enough condemnation to bruise your ego. This leaves us in an emotional deadlock, making us far less receptive to new ideas, as well as more combative to opposing ideas. However right we may think we are about something, there's always someone telling us that we're wrong. And when our beliefs aren't being validated by our experience, we lose our minds. It doesn't strike me as a coincidence that, in a world in which our sense of reality is constantly being challenged, we may be more divided than we've ever been. On one side, you have dumb people who, when challenged, go into primal mode and compensate for a lack of wisdom by simply getting louder and more aggressive. And on the other side, you have smart people who, when challenged by obvious ignorance, are often willing to abandon their faculties of wisdom and respond with equal ferocity by getting louder and more aggressive. Unfortunately, this dynamic doesn't seem like the best way to introduce better ideas into the world. And yet, what other option are we left with when louder and more aggressive seems to be the only way that we can cut through the noise of an oversaturated information landscape and be heard? If we want this project of society to eventually work, we all kind of need to be living in the same reality and at least agree to fundamental truths. We need to be willing to make sacrifices in order to build our own wisdom. And we need to respect the sacrifice of those who came before us to form a consensus of wisdom. And sure, sometimes the consensus will be wrong, but let's at least count on good wisdom to confirm this before we make absolute assumptions based on dubious rumors and conspiracy theories. And if it's still unclear, it's okay to not be sure of something. Maybe based on the information available to you, you can only be 50% sure. Then just be 50% sure and measure your actions accordingly. It's its own form of wisdom to simply admit, I don't know, when you actually don't know. The internet has delivered on its promise as a fast track to more information, but there just aren't any shortcuts to better wisdom. We need to work for it, and we need to challenge ourselves to practice better discipline and more awareness in how we consume information. And for the love of God, let's give our brains a rest every once in a while. Our habitual dopamine-fueled information binging may present more opportunities to grow our knowledge. The internet has certainly made us more knowledgeable than we've ever been. But is it really worth the trade-off of less wisdom, less social harmony, and, well, less sanity?